Hi dear viewers and welcome to another episode. In today's video we want to discuss when actually to go into an endgame or how to identify a position where you want to go into an endgame. And therefore we are going to take a look at one of my games. So let's just start, and we will not go into the details of the opening but try to understand the transition to the middle game and then the end game. So both sides just develop their pieces, and rook e1 is preparing e5 after b5. Black is trying to gain space on the queen side. So now e5, knight d7, knight f1. So the bishop can go to f4 if it is needed. For example, after queen to c7. So a5, h4. So here you can see white is trying to gain something on the king side, black on the queen side. Bishop a6, h5, b4. Maybe not the most precise move because now black can black must deal with this h6 move. And after g6 we see now we come into a position where black might have some issues in an endgame, especially if the queens are off the board, and we will see why in a second. So here comes a3, a prophylactic move, just stopping the attack on the queen side. So in the next move, white can just continue on the king side uninterrupted because black is really missing the pieces to play there. So this pawn was attacked and now it's defended a third time. Queen to b5, a very ambitious move, giving up the attack on e5, and this allows the exchange of the black squared bishops. So bishop to g5, and now it's already not so clear what black should do, because after queen b8, white doesn't take on e7 first, because then maybe knight e7, and still, obviously white is much better here, but I believe white can play better and plays queen to d2, just defending the bishop with the queen, rook to a7, and now bishop takes e7 because it becomes clear that white didn't really have any other useful move in this position. Knight takes e7. So now let's focus on the structure. Here we see this pawn on h6, and we shouldn't look at it in a very isolated way because we also see there are two knights here, and this is making everything much more interesting in my opinion, because these two knights are going to support the pawn, or the pawn is going to support the knight. Depends how you view it. So now white tries to create some other problems now on the queen side. So first you see white has achieved his goal on the king side, create a structure where the endgame will ultimately be bad for black, and then place on the queen side. And this is possible because white is completely in control of the center. So c takes b4 was played. Of course, if rook takes b4, we have discussed about this, then white would love to exchange the queens, and this should be very good, especially after bishop takes a4, just winning a pawn. So a takes b4, posing a lot of problems because this pawn is weak. So black is in trouble, and of course black doesn't want to exchange queens here, so a takes b4, but still rook takes a4, and white has gained material on the queen side and this favorable structure on the king side, and black is in lots of trouble. Black tried to play b3, a very interesting move and also a very precise move, because it's not really clear what else black can play. So here rook to b4, an attempt to exchange rooks, because now if the queen just moves, no, c7 for example, then the rook just takes. And just to illustrate the idea, a possible idea was c takes b3, and now just trying to exploit the fact that this pawn is a little bit vulnerable. But still, white has an overwhelming advantage here. But of course, white wants to win in a clean way without too much interruptions. The rook to b7, forcing rook to b7, and now after the exchange of rooks, obviously white is closer to his goal of getting into an endgame. Pawn to c3, of course taking was possible, but why take? This gives black some play against this pawn. Still completely winning for white, but making things more difficult. So pawn to c3, knight to c5. Trying to target this pawn, but obviously white had calculated all of these things. Bishop f1. And now knight to f1. And now the problem of black is black reached a more or less acceptable setup. He's down a pawn, and maybe even bigger of an issue, white has plenty of moves here with which he can improve his position. So first came rook a1, putting the rook on the only open file of the board. That's obviously a huge benefit, and by far the best place for the rook. Then came bishop to b5. One threat was, for example, if black just played something generic like rook a8, a check comes, and here obviously the position is rather bad because this knight is horrible. And here black must always watch out for rook takes a6 and rook takes a6, for example. And this d4 ideas on the one side, because knight e4 never works. Just knight takes, pawn takes, and bishop takes here. This is a completely winning endgame after this move, because the king is rather weak, and g7 is a mating square, a motif which is very unpleasant. So even if the queens are on the board, very unpleasant for black. However, white will have a much more pleasant time when the queens are exchanged. And here knight to d4 is a very elegant way to go into this endgame, to set endgame, because now a lot of pieces are already exchanged. And rook a3, targeting this pawn, bishop to c6, bishop to e2, developing the bishop. The bishop wants to go to d1 maybe. It's probably much better than f1, as you can see. And after queen to b4, black is voluntarily exchanging queens, and of course white is not asking twice the question. He is just taking the queen. And now you see this pawn is weak, this pawn might be a weakness, and the back rank of black is horribly weak. And these were the important parameters you had to keep in mind, and this is perfectly visible here. Look at this. Weak, pawns weak, and black is going to be material down, so rook to b8 played, and white doesn't bother. White didn't take here. It was a little bit kind of a trap because of bishop a4. Very unpleasant losing a piece here. It would be still playable for white, believe it or not, but who would like to play like this? There's no need, and it is not so clear if white is winning. And just bear in mind, please, that whenever this f7 pawn falls, there is this unavoidable mate on h7, rook h7, the so-called Arabian mate, combination of knight and rook. So now let's go back. So therefore rook a7, of course white doesn't blunder the piece. Rook f8 is forced, nothing else is working. And now simply rook c7, bishop a4, rook c3, back. Again rook c7, repetition to gain some time, to come closer to the 40th move, where you gain some time. And now rook to b7, knight c2, and the exchange is making sure that black is utterly lost here, because after rook takes c2, bishop takes d3, one thing becomes clear: all the play is happening on the black squares. Look at these pawns, all are on black, and black has the white squared bishop, and this is a big problem. So pawn to g5, and simply f3, bishop g6, king f2, and one thing becomes clear still: back rank is weak. The black player has horrible weaknesses there, and black is currently threatening to take on b2, and this is possible because it would be a check. So therefore simply b4, black cannot take it. Why? We have already pointed this out, because of d-mate. So despite the fact that black had managed to defend f7 with his bishop on g6, so the rook is free to move to other squares than f8, which is great. Still the position is entirely lost, because here black is just not doing anything, and white will push through his passed pawn, and it's just a matter of time in this position. And here you see the pawn is marching through, and after knight to d7, black decided to resign. As you can see, it was pretty clear early on that white just wants to exchange queens and go into this endgame because of the bad coordination of the black pieces, because of the weakness on f7, because of the weakness on h7, and the weak back rank. See you in the next video.
Hey, check this video out to make sure that you get more important information to bring your chess to the next level.